Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today. We are excited to have you here as a part of our PathLock Innovation Series today for our next session. This session is how Jabil automates SoD controlling, monitoring, and ensures audit readiness as they roll out SAP S/4HANA. And I'm going to be putting a link in the chat right now. And the link will take you to the schedule of events for today. There's several more sessions today if you'd like to join, and you can see that schedule at the link that I just put in the chat. A few housekeeping items. If you have any audio issues during this webinar, please click on preferences in that audio. From there, you can check to see if you're using the appropriate audio device. You can also click on the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming through your speakers. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation, so please type any questions into the questions box that you'll see on your control panel for our speakers to answer at the end of the event. To prevent background noise, everyone is on mute. And with that, I'll turn the time over to our Susan Stapleton and Susan Zortia to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks, everybody, for joining. My name is Susan Stapleton. I'm a VP of Partner Advisory here at PathLock. I really focus on supporting our SAP relationship. And I came here from SAP, where I was responsible for the GRC products for quite some time. And before that, I was at a company when SOX regulatory requirements came about. And I kind of got pulled out of the business. And I have been doing GRC type stuff ever since then. And here at PathLock, I really focus on working with SAP customers. And I think, Susan, do you want to do a quick intro now, or you want to wait until you start your session? Why don't you go ahead now if you're ready?
Yeah. Sure. Hi, I'm Susan Zortea. I'm the second Susan of the call. And I work as the Global Governance Senior Manager at Jabil. And we're an OEM electronics manufacturer, global manufacturer. I've been with Jabil for about 20 years now, and I started in the finance and controlling modules of SAP and moved over to this team when we started to work with PathLock and doing an upgrade in GRC and using the AVM tool through PathLock. So I've been an SAP person for at least 25 years, but just in this position for about 7 years now. And we really enjoy working with PathLock and the work we are able to do with them that we couldn't do before.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan, for that nice commercial. And now for the Susan and Susan show today, we're going to be talking about specifically segregation of duties, transforming segregation of duties, and how you manage those when you're probably going through business transformation at the same time. I'm going to give a quick overview of the solution that Jabil adopted several years ago to better manage user segregation of duty risk. And then Susan's going to talk a little bit about their project, their benefits, and even give an overview of the company, which I think is interesting because I think Jabil is an extremely interesting company. And then I'll take it back at the end to do the wrap up. But again, thank you for joining. I'm excited about this innovation series, and I'm glad we have people joining and learning more about PathLock, governance, risk and compliance, security, and all of the things that we can bring to the table. So even if you're not a public company, private companies do this as well. SOX controls are a best practice to reduce fraud and insider threats, but it does take a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of oversight to gain assurance. That is both for you internally, for your CFO who's certifying your SOX controls, but your external certifications and ensuring effectiveness for your audit purposes. Our session today is going to focus on user risk and specifically segregation of duties and how best to not only ensure that you have effective controls, but how to also use that information gained by understanding what people are doing in your business applications. A typical company loses 5% of their annual revenue to fraud, and half of those fraud cases are involving internal control weaknesses in which there are no controls in place or companies know how to override those controls. And everybody knows now with this continued economic uncertainty, the lingering pandemic issues, supply chain issues, these world events that are greatly impacting how all of us are doing business, it's putting additional pressure on the organization, the supply chain, and even people's personal finances, which always increases the likelihood of fraud. This situation, heavier scrutiny from audit, it continues to magnify the need for control and enforcement around user segregation of duties. Almost all of the organizations I talk to now, they have gone through transformation, they're starting transformation, or they're midway through. Most of them, because of my role, they're moving to S4. But it also includes not only S4 transformation or adoption, but adoption of new business applications as well. When we did this before, we were transforming our business by moving to one ERP, typically SAP in my world, and we were consolidating all kinds of different business processes into that one core ERP system. And from a finance and control environment, this should have simplified oversight and control activities, and it did, even though there was complexities in the security models of access of SAP, and we all struggled with getting our arms around how people got access to do what they did, but also just the number of regulatory requirements and the controls continue to grow year over year over year. So even with most business activities taking place in ERP, it's still a challenge just to make sure that you can prove you have good controls, that they're being performed, and that they are effective. In today's world of the digital enterprise, internal control, finance, audit, they're all tasked with monitoring multiple systems now. Those systems can be on-prem, in the cloud. Almost every company is dealing with a hybrid environment, maybe even custom applications. There's high volumes of users, high volumes of data. Users have different IDs. There is just a tremendous amount of complexity when it comes to managing what users can do and monitoring what users are doing. And it's just going to get more complex, increasing transactional volumes, transactional velocity, more threat actors, greater attack sophistication, more and more cloud solutions, best of breed solutions coming in to help you manage your business or that your business users will be using. Without optimizing your processes, it's nearly impossible to have efficient management of SODs. So today we're going to talk about SOD mitigation, how you can optimize those processes with proactive identification and resolution of SOD issues, not only within SAP, but across your entire landscape. And the goal is to reduce risk, eliminate redundant activities, very manual activities by a lot of the stakeholders, IT, security, business, audit, internal controls, compliance, compliance coordinators. There is any number of people that have their hands in SOX controls. But at the end of that process, we need to make sure we can demonstrate continuous compliance with SOX 404. And whether the risks are all within SAP ERP itself, and sometimes companies are still dealing with that, or across systems, they need to be monitored. And your risks today that you're monitoring, if they're procurement risk, order to cash risk, just because some of those activities move to another application does not mean those risks go away. Your procurement risk can now be in Ariba or across Ariba in SAP. Your sales order risk could be in Salesforce and across Salesforce and SAP. You have to figure out a way to have and manage user risk across the entire application ecosystem. But if you can automate your controls and monitor just actual SOD violations, identify them in a centralized way, you can also quantify your risk and provide a view to the exposure the company has related to SOD activities. Not only can you automate the control, but the company can gain valuable insights into user and business activities that if you don't have controls or you don't have a centralized process, those controls are going to be just go unnoticed, potentially for a long time, and hopefully not be found by your auditors. So before I turn it over to Susan, I'm just going to go through a little bit about what Jabil is using to automate their whole control process when it comes to SAP. So I know because a lot of you on this call will probably be SAP Access Control users, this dashboard should be somewhat familiar. And all companies put a tremendous amount of time and effort in making sure their risks are correct. Their reports for SOD risks are remediated or cleaned up wherever it can be done. But at some point in time, all companies are at a point in time where there are user risks that need to be mitigated because you cannot remove these risks. And typically for access control customers, they're seeing these risks in SAP. But also think about if this user graphic that I'm showing were risks that crossed SAP, Ariba, Manhattan Warehouse Management, Salesforce, Workday. You know, your user risk going forward could be across multiple applications. How do you mitigate those risks? Because typically a manual control is documented in access control, and then it moves into a black hole. Hopefully someone's performing those controls, you've got them assigned, maybe you've got them developed. As I said, you know, in my earlier slide, a lot of companies don't even have controls in place, and that's typically not happening as much as it did in the past, but there are still companies that really struggle with monitoring what users are doing. So access control or any other GRC solution can help you identify who can do activities that result in a segregation of duty and result in an authorization can do segregation of duty risk, meaning users have the authorization to process invoices and payments, purchase orders and invoices, and so on. And that's what access control will tell you, and that is definitely something that you need to have in place to prevent excessive access or SODs when it's not necessary. But when users need this access, we can go through and monitor 100% of the transactions in SAP, in Coupa, Ariba, Salesforce, and so on, to identify when the same user did both of these activities, created a supplier, and processed an invoice to the same supplier that they created or changed. So, you know, access control will tell me how many users can do it. Through automation, we can go through and comb through 100% of the transactions, correlate that data, and identify the users who did process an invoice to the same supplier that they created or changed. Not only that, but how many times did they do that activity, and what's the dollar value associated? We call this risk quantification, but really, it's giving a much different picture into a bunch of potential risk into actual risk. And when I say actual risk, it just means this is an exposure, but it doesn't mean there was any fraud or inappropriate activity. This is just giving you an effective control and detective control to monitor all of that risk. And it can be done across systems. So as I was saying before, it can be quite complex. User IDs in Coupa may be different than SAP or in Hyperion or other applications. We have the ability to map user access, all our user IDs to one centralized ID, go out and look at transactional information across all of these systems, and through a series of linkages, the first one required being that the user ID or a group of IDs that is the same user across these applications are the same. Then if the PO is the same, the invoice number is the same, and so on, then we surface that out as an actual or hard hit SOD violation that needs to be reviewed and signed off on, which then in turn becomes your mitigation control. I think of this as continuous control monitoring. And if you're familiar with process control, CCMs for business process activity is a term, you know, that's standardly used. But I think about this as continuous control monitoring for user risk, looking at 100% of the transactions wherever those transactions are being actioned, cloud, on-premise, or custom applications, correlating the data to the user, and when an SOD is found, then notifying the manager for review and sign off. And customers do this very differently. They might do these controls once a week, once a month, once a quarter. Some of our customers do it twice a year. Other people start doing these controls more often, which definitely can reduce the amount of fraud or the time fraud goes on before it's identified. If you can, you know, do these more on a monthly or even a weekly basis versus a quarterly or semi-annual. But the fact of the matter is that the detail stays completely online, cannot be manipulated, and your audit trail is completely online as well, which is very much necessary to prove effective controls, not only efficient controls, but effective as well. And the business then can look at a work list of the SOD violations, review these, sign off on these, and as I said, this now becomes the mitigation control. You've removed the requirement to develop a control, test that control, document it, and so on, and do it manually, period over period over period. These controls will be running in the background, emails pushed out when needed on your schedule, and the business owner comes in, reviews these, and signs off on them, and then your audit trail is here. And each SOD violation is correlated on one line item. So here, the same user received goods and processed invoice for the same goods that they received in the warehouse. And so you'll see the invoice number, the goods receipt number, even the PO material, and so on. And of course, this is how it's quantified in the dashboarding. What was the amount of that transaction? Because when we're looking at actual transactions, there's a dollar value associated to almost every single one of them. It's scrapping of material, it's asset depreciation, it's payroll, it could be anything, but typically there is a financial dollar value associated with these SoD transactions. And during the process or cycle, you can have this centralized repository, which gives you the ability to dashboard it or look for trends, monitor risk by business process, by users, top 10 users, top 10 risks, just a tremendous amount of insight. And again, I don't look at this as remediation. I look at this as the detective control that your internal and external auditors can rely on. And also, if you want the business to take ownership of risk, you have the ability to push this data out to them, let them review what users are doing in their business applications and sign off on it and have them be responsible. So there's a lot of great things that come with automation, not only efficiencies and streamlining and consistency, but also really enabling the business to take ownership if you choose to do that, because you're making it as simple as possible for them to just focus on what matters, just focus on exceptions, and really, take responsibility for and accountability for what users are doing in the business applications that the business owns. So, I talk way too fast. Had a lot of coffee today. Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will push forward the slides as you need, but please take it away.
Okay, thanks so much, Susan. Okay, so again, my name is Susan Zortea, and I am the Senior Manager of Global Governance for SAP at Jabil. And if you can move that forward, I'll give you a little bit of a background on Jabil. So we were founded in 1966 in Michigan and in somebody's garage, actually. So they started the biz, two guys started this electronics business from their garage and moved down to sunny Florida, and we are now, our corporate headquarters are in St. Petersburg, Florida. And we now have, where we started with the garage, we now have over 52 million square feet of manufacturing space globally. We are in over 100 different sites in 26 different countries. And we have a little bit closer to almost 250K dedicated employees now. So they are Jabil users in the systems, and not all are in SAP, but that is how many total employees we have. And because we've been in business that long, we have a very, very tenured management team that are very interested in the supply chain and the logistics and all the disruptions we've had, like Susan was mentioning, over the pandemic and supply chain demands and a lot of automation of services. So we've got a great tenured management team at Jabil now. And where, again, we started very, very small, we're well into the $29 billion of revenue in fiscal year ending 21. Our fiscal year ends August 30th, so that was our years before revenue. So again, just a little bit of information about us, and transformation is a big word that we use all the time here, that we have to always be transformational and in our departments, and it is a must in our company. It is the central driver of all our activity and how we gain and retain customers. And we have to know that because of that complexity, it's something we have to be very versatile with. And again, because of all the different factors now, it's at an all-time high, and we have to react to that and be proactive as well. Our products have to have.
Yeah, what are a couple of products that that people on the call might know about that Jabil is producing?
Okay, sure. So you might not see our name on an iPhone, but we make some of the insides of an iPhone. We make the insides of car fobs. We make the inside of a lot of Cisco equipment and HP equipment. We do some business with a lot of our customers. We don't have a huge range of customers, but a lot of them are very high volume. And we make the insides of computers like motherboards and circuits systems inside of a lot of equipment. So that's just
Awesome.
an
I just
example.
realized that wasn't really one of our squares about
Yeah.
Jabil. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, sure. Okay, you can move to the next screen. Okay, so just our SAP landscape. I wanted to give you a little bit of a background about the various types of landscape we have here. And our first install of SAP was in 1998. And just this year, our largest system, our S4 commercial system, we went to S4. We were not in S4 before January of 22. We are now an S4 in our commercial system with active users of 31,000 people. We have two other manufacturing systems, and they are still in ECC, but planning to go to S4, but we don't have an estimated time on them yet. One is our NIPRO division, and that's healthcare products, and there's about 3,000 users in that system. And the other one is our it's healthcare medical division, so it's a little bit more specialized. And this division makes like medical equipment. I always liken this to myself, as I had to have a lumbar fusion, and I have some titanium screws and rods and pins in my back, and that is what our healthcare PO2 system manufactures, along with a lot of other medical devices. We have 5,000 people in that system, and our business warehouse server is also still active. We have about 2,300 people in that system, and GRC has its own server now. We used to be co-located with GTS, and we now, when we upgraded in May of 2022, we are on our own server, and we have about 9,000 users in GRC. And of course, Solution Manager, we're very strict because we're a publicly held company. We have a very strict change management system. So we have an entire server dedicated to Solution Manager. That's how all our transports move through the system. Very, very complex and stringent process. We have about 900 people in that system. Mostly that's all IT people. Okay, so the S4 HANA story on us is that as I mentioned earlier, we did go to S4 1909 in January of 2022 for our main division. That's our largest division. And our NIPRO and our healthcare divisions the planning is in process, but has not been done yet. Our BW system, we are not planning for S4 right now. And I mentioned this a little bit in the screen before this, that we did a server migration in GRC. We are now on Access Control 12.0, Support Pack 14, and we are in the middle of activating the UAR module, the User Access Review module, and we have an estimated time for that to be about 2 or 3 months out right now. We were using a system outside of SAP for User Access Review, but they wanted to take advantage of the ability that a GRC system has, and we're putting that into place too. Soulman is not on S4. Okay, so our segregation of duties history. So previous to this, previous to us installing GRC in 2015, well, we actually had GRC, but the upgraded version of it was 10.0 in 2015. That was a major role redesign we had. And previous to that, we had to pay consultants from a risk assessment consulting firm, and that was well into the millions per year to manage our segregation of duties controls, because we did not have a way of managing it successfully and being able to report on it. And then the internal team, which was our internal audit team and our FIC, financial internal controls team, spent an extensive amount of time working with the consulting firms and providing the evidence. Because again, we're publicly held and we have to be able to speak to our segregation of duties and how we're maintaining it. So monitoring scope was a subset of financial transactions, and that's how we defined how well it could work. And we actually do perform control activities quarterly. Some are semi-annual, some are annual, but most of them are quarterly now. And previous to our being more active in the GRC module, the concerns over potential fraud, just like Susan said, everybody's personal financial needs play into how a person may be likely to commit fraud. So that is definitely, that was always a concern of our external audit team and internal audit, but it remained very uncomfortably high before we started using GRC. So this was what we wanted to alleviate by getting access control in place and our AVM tool in place as well. Yeah. So this project that we name all our projects something, and this was called Project Shield. And like I said, it started in 2015. And then with that, upgrading to GRC 10.0, we created a global governance team with the initiative that we wanted to organize and standardize all of our SOD compliance structure. What really made this a successful venture was that we had management's endorsement, and we knew there was going to be a lot of work to take a completely manual system done by, an outside consulting firm and bringing it in-house and implementing what's needed to be done in GRC and in AVM to alleviate all the concerns. So having their endorsement really made the transition very smooth for every area of our business. So we went to the highest level of our leadership and had their endorsement, and they promoted it, and it was a very well thought out plan when we did that. So once we defined what our controls were going to be, we deployed SAP Access Control into over 90 plus connectors. And the reason why it's 90 plus when you saw just 5 or so systems on it is we do it for all the production and development and staging systems for all the area service we have. So we use 90 plus connectors for SOD risk analysis and provisioning. Not all the systems go through risk analysis, but the ones where we're manufacturing and selling product, they do. And with that, we also installed the access violation management, which really saved so much money, because this tool, the AVM tool through Pathlock, it was deployed to all of our production systems. And as Susan explained, in SOD and access control, those are the things that you can do if you have access to them. If we don't stop you from accessing or having access to both creating an invoice and paying an invoice, that just shows that you have the ability to act on that risk. The access violation management tool shows us who did actually take action on it. And Susan showed a very detailed example of everything that this system can do is tell you how many times they did it, what the amount was, what the document numbers were, who did it, and how many times they did it in a month. We do it every month. So that really put the icing on the cake for the access control. So together, we monitor both the S4 and the ECC environment. So SAP Access Control and the AVM tool were upgraded. So AVM was upgraded to be able to handle S4 and Access Control. When we moved to 12.0 in May, it handled S4 more successfully. So because of this, we have reduced the amount of risk activities, greatly reduced in AVM. We now have 93 total SOD risks, and 53, which is over half of them, are monitored in AVM. And every month we review them, and like Susan said, an email will go out to whomever owns that particular control or process, like maybe the controller in one site, maybe the financial manager in another site, maybe the operations manager for another type of risk that's been quantified and acted on, and they give their opinion about whether it's allowed or not. And if it should not be allowed, then we remove it from the person's access. And if it is, we have now evidence to provide to internal and external audit that the risks were mitigated. And we call it offenders when we have to send these emails out. And then if the controller, manager, or operations manager, any of those leadership people decide that those people shouldn't have the access, then we resolve it in the GRC team by removing their roles. Okay, so the benefits of automating controls were right away. We didn't have to pay an advisory firm millions of dollars a year. So that really avoided so much expenditure for us. And we have a team in place and a process in place that monitors and mitigates everything. So the 3 financial staff members do not have to support an external consulting firm. We don't have to review the activity and compile the information. So that really reduced our external annual audit fees. And it is a great savings. One of the big things we saw right away when we installed GRC Access Control and AVM is, if you can believe this, our risks decreased by 98% in SODs monitored by continuous control monitoring. That was a big win for us when we did this, because mostly we had to be reactive with an audit firm, a consulting firm. We had to have them come in and look at the activity afterwards and then monitor it that way. This way we real-time monitor everything, the SODs and the quantification if they've acted on them with AVM. We decreased, of course, the risk of stock price damage, because again, earnings per share and our publicly held stock program has to comply with SOX. So this took care of all of that and kept us in good standing. And we now also have the ability to distinguish actual SOD conflicts from potential conflicts. And that's what we do with AVM. So again, potential is where if they've received the access, and sometimes we do have to give access that's violating because a site is very small and they don't have a large enough team to segregate the duties. But with AVM, we can see, all right, so you have to do this. Did you do these 2 things together? And if you did, I want to know when you did it, why you did it, and your document numbers and the dollar amount. So that's what we can see with AVM. Okay, and then in this way, we definitely focus on a real risk.
If I'm moving too fast, tell me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No.
Okay.
So these are the things we advise to consider when you're thinking about deploying AVM. Consider that if there's simultaneous implementations with a global rule set. We do have a global rule set, and as Susan mentioned, you can also do peripheral systems with it. So you can also have to expand that to different rule sets if you're going to include Ariba or Coupa or Workday or any of those other peripheral systems that work with SAP. And AVM can work with all of those. Right now, we're just using our AVM relationship with SAP modules right now. So when you are upgrading GRC, or even your manufacturing systems or whatever systems that AVM is tied to, we also have built into our systems that they must include us that monitor the AVM system if there's any changes needed in AVM. And likely there are some. Of course, with S4, there definitely were some because there were new T codes and new processes that were being introduced in S4. We also want to review all the risks. We, like I just mentioned with S4, you can introduce new processes. So you need to be able to review it all, not just the changes, and make sure they all pertain to what your new business is like, and that they all fall under the umbrella of compliance and publicly held companies. One thing we found out was that the server size and processing capacity should definitely be considered. Before we upgraded in May of 2022 to the latest version of GRC, our server size, because we were co-located with some other modules, was definitely not large enough, and we felt the pain of that. So a little bit performance issues, and that you should consider what your volume of transactions are, how often you're going to be reviewing, monitoring, and all that information plays a part in how your server size should be determined. Job run times that is a big system requirement that we do with GRC. We have about 267 jobs that run every day, that they synchronize the activity between our target system and GRC, and those run every single hour. Some run hourly, some run 2 times a day, some run once a week, but we do run a lot of jobs. So you need to consider those sort of things when you are installing our GRC with AVM. And again, when the rule set changes, we do an annual rule set review. Our GRC team does that annually, and we go over every single risk every single year. And if we have a change to the rule set, we also want to make those changes to AVM so that they are in sync with each other when we pull the monthly monitoring of AVM. Okay. So we continue to evolve and transform just as we try to make the business more efficient and more, time to market available for everything. So the processes and benefits of AVM have been carried over to the S4 systems, and it was seamless. Because we were ready for it, we knew that AVM and GRC needed to upgrade when our main manufacturing instance was upgrading to S4. We did it as part of that total project. And it was seamless because again, the upper management was in agreement with everything, and they promoted it so that everybody was involved and became integrated with it. So the Pathlock team, they delivered the technical controls for the differences in AVM for S4 ERP. So we employed them during our upgrade as well as when we employed them to first install it. And some of the tactical activities were that the control configuration was updated in AVM to include very specific new differences in S4. And some of those were transactions, some of them were function modules and various different activities. The other activities were scheduling controls pointed to the new S4 environment. So we have to make sure that the system, because the manufacturing systems are a target system from our AVM server and our GRC server. So those controls had to be put into place too, pointed to the right way, to the right systems by remote function calls, and those all had to be updated and reviewed so that they worked properly for the upgrade. And the controls for the user risks were in place prior to go live. So it's not something that we said, all right, go live in your manufacturing environments and we'll make sure everything goes afterwards. We went live at the same time they went live so that everything was in place, tested completely, unit testing and integration testing completely done before the manufacturing instance went into the S4 go live time. Okay. So looking forward, we have defined access requests have a 3-tiered workflow. It is a little lengthy, but it's been working for us. And this way, we want to leave this the way it is, but we want to continually monitor it and see if it works best going forward. We have the first thing that a person, when they create an access request, they have to have their direct manager approval. Then the workflow moves over to the role owner approvals. And if those two steps are done, but the request has some SOD violations in it, it will come to my team for mitigation. And we work out there whether we should allow it and mitigate it through AVM or not allow it. And we have the final rights to reject a request or reject some roles within the request based on SOD risks. And again, we were upgraded completely to 12.0. Our support pack is 14, so we want to stay on top of that. I think we're well into the 20s already, maybe 19 or 20 in support packs for GRC. So we look at that quarterly and make sure that we stay on top of that. And just to mention again that one S4 server supports the largest division of our business. That's our commercial business. And AVM will continue to work with both non-S4 and S4 instances. It's a seamless process.
All right.
Oh, okay, so the benefit. Yeah, I forgot about this screen. So because of the installation of the latest available version of GRC and AVM, we have immediate transparency to see what's going on in the business. We have not reactive access to potential audit concerns, but we are proactively addressing them. So this is so much better for us to be ready for them and address them and correct them before audit finds them and would possibly give us a less than good rating. So we definitely, that is one of the most celebrated advantages that we have from this. And then we also pull the business in with the leadership management endorsing it. The business is responsible to be able to review their access risks. And we have, again, so many locations now. We have over 200 plant controllers, and we also have regional offices and shared service centers all over the world. So those people, they have role ownership in many of the roles in GRC that are in the target manufacturing systems. And we put some of the ownership on them. If they don't feel that the person requesting the access should have this, they can reject it. So they have immediate access as well. It doesn't come reactionary to them either. So it's good for those they can refuse somebody that's asking for access to one of their sites and they shouldn't have it. And of course, the reduction of risk is also a plus side that we got from this. And with being able to provide audit assurance with effective controls through AVM is been one of the biggest advantages of this. Our transparency and our proactive look at everything has been just a phenomenal.
All right, I think it's back to me. Thank you, Susan. So
Sure.
I'll just do a quick wrap up here that we can introduce transformation for controls. Jabil did it a long time ago. A lot of our customers have been doing this for quite some time. I think one of the important things when you think about S4, controls have to be redeveloped. If you had controls in place for ECC and they were granular controls monitoring user risks, at the time you move to S4, those controls have to be redone. And you can kind of adopt more of an automated off-the-shelf solution, or you can have your consulting groups or implementation partners help you develop those controls. But just think it all remains manual. Running those controls, testing those controls, documenting those controls, uploading proof, all of that. It just becomes unmanageable. And think about also when you have to look at user access and what they're doing across now Ariba and so on. So if you can automate that and look for ways to transform your controls, get involved with your transformation projects, discuss your use of access control. You can extend access control coverage out to your cloud solution so that access control is your repository to identify all can-do user risks, no matter what your backend systems are. And then with AVM sitting on top of that, you can automate all of your risk mitigation, no matter what business applications are in scope for that as well. So really can free up a tremendous amount of resources that one of our customers says, when you do this process and you do it well and you're doing it manually or semi-automated, it takes a village. It takes a lot of people across the organization to support a project for internal controls and specifically even, segregation of duties. Okay, maybe while we're doing questions, we'll leave this slide up and talk about a Starbucks card if you want to book a meeting with us. There's an email address here. Let me see if I can open up the questions and see what we have. I should be smart enough to do this. All right. So there's one question out here: is there a specific use case for non-prod SOD monitoring? Susan, you have access control connected to a bunch of non-prod systems, but I don't think it's specifically for SOD monitoring. I think it's more for provisioning, isn't it?
Yes. So the non-production systems are more for access provisioning and for those managers and role owners to know who is getting access and if they should or shouldn't.
Does some of that have to do, just a follow-up question because I'm curious, because you have a medical device or medical supplies, are those validated systems where you have to keep track of all of the non-prod systems as well?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
We do run risk analysis on our staging environments in the medical system and the healthcare system as well. Yes, we have so many more. The validation system really takes us through a lot of additional work.
Okay, so not necessarily SOD, but definitely, I know from working with other customers as well, you just have to have the approval process. Something else just came in. Are the low and medium priority that is not needed? Okay, you mentioned about 50 SOD risks that are monitored via AVM and the rest are not. Are the rest low and medium priority that's not needed to be monitored? This is a good question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anything, other than things that cannot be monitored because they don't have a financial value at the time of installation of AVM, it's not that they were lower or medium. We also don't even have low risk. We just have high and medium. But we tried to get everything that was quantifiable in dollars and cents terms in AVM. But sometimes, like one of our risks is that you can open and close a financial period, and the other side of the risk is being able to actually post journals. So that's hard to quantify. So that's not in AVM, but I believe now AVM can do a little bit more quantification that we didn't know it could do, and when we installed it in 2015. So.
Yeah, I think there's a few more of those. Some of those I think were basis type risk, not necessarily like, so when Susan talks about financial quantification, financial risk is really what we focused on early on. But now, customers who automate segregation of duties, they want to automate 100% of the mitigation and across 100% of the applications and 100% of the users. So we are getting to the point now where we have automated several of the basis SOD risks where it's possible, as well as some of the things just like Susan talked about, opening and closing posting periods and posting journal entries while you've opened the posting period or posting a payment while you've opened the posting period. So, I think there's some of those that we can add in to up that percentage or quantity of what Jabil's monitoring. I think it's just been running fast and doing a whole lot of stuff to support the business and upgrades and everything else that we need to step back and take a look at that.
Yes, putting new programs in place has taken that away, yeah.
Yeah. All right. How do you provide assurance to external auditors for the data extracted and exceptions generated? That's a good one too.
I'm not sure I understand the question. How do we do what?
How do you, your auditors rely on AVM, right? I mean, how are they able to be assured that that AVM is good?
Okay, so in AVM, it has to tie back to, we make sure, and we just had a refresher SOX meeting this morning with all of the managers and controllers and people that have access or ownership of controls, ITGC controls, that screenshots can show the evidence of a point in time that it actually happened, and the document numbers and the dollar values in AVM tie back to the manufacturing systems, and we can prove that, and that assures them that it's an accurate quantification tool. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure if I did.
I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of testing involved in making sure that the SODs that we validate them, right? That the transactions that are reported are correct, that the transactions that aren't reported it's correct, that we're not missing anything. I think it's really just testing, validating, documenting, and making sure you do that up front in the process, in the project. And once you do that, then for anybody who's implemented access control, which I did back in the day, your auditors are going to come in, they're going to run your SOD reports, they're going to look at your SOD rule set, they're going to make sure that everything's working, that they're properly reporting, and that your rules are correct and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, they typically do that first time through when you adopt software. Second time through, they'll look to see what changes were made from the prior audit. Did you change your master data, your configuration, any of that kind of stuff? And if not, they typically rely on that going forward, that they don't have to redo all of that testing and validation because the system is handling that for you. That's what I find with not only AVM, but access control and other software solutions as well.
Yes, and for instance, when we moved up to S4 from ECC in our main commercial instance, we had to show audit that we were taking into consideration every different changing process in S4, not just TCOs, but like you said, processes. Things change. And we actually, I think we actually disabled one or two of our risks based on knowing what S4 can do now versus what ECC could not do prior.
Yeah. All right, I think we're going to have to wrap it here. If there's any remaining questions, hey, book a meeting, get a $25 gift card. But we appreciate you joining the session today. Susan, thank you very much for presenting with me and asking me to present with you. I appreciate it. And any other questions, just send an email to that events@pathlock.com. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. We appreciate your interest in this topic.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you to both of you. And again, if you would like to join any of the other sessions, please click on the link to join the other sessions.